So, hello Oslo, or when I first got told I could speak at NDC Oslo about 6 years ago, I thanked Jakob for letting me visit Denmark for the first time. I nearly didn't get to that conference. So, who here saw the opening keynote 2 days ago? It seems like a world away. Yes. So that was Mikko Hyppinen from F-Secure, talked about unicorn hunting. And what I noticed was very early on, he said he'd spent 30 years with the company and has had an incredibly interesting life and has enjoyed it thoroughly. This keynote is almost an antidote to that because I have not worked for the same company for 30 years. So this is all about the choices I've made. It's called Two Roads Diverged in the Wood. Who knows this poem? Has anyone heard it? Who's ever seen Dead Poets Society, the film? You see, that's why I couldn't do jokes about Dead Poets Society, because not enough people have seen it. So in this poem, whoops, I've gone one too far, sorry about that. That conclusion is, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So it's a poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And in Dead Poets Society, it's all about an English teacher teaching kids at a private school about poetry and about the wonders of life. And that really stuck with me, that it's important that the most attractive, the most fast way of going through life is not always going to be the best. So that's what this talk is about. It's a kind of explanation of how I've managed to get in, have had my career and all the jobs I've done. So I've done quite a lot of jobs, so I decided to just rattle them through while I talk. Because the choices you make in life often seem quite random, but they greatly kind of affect where you get in life. And looking back, I've realized that I've made some pretty good choices in the past. I didn't realize they were particularly good choices at the time. I probably didn't do them for exactly the right reasons, but they've made my life as a developer fun, enjoyable, and ultimately much more rewarding. So I'm going to take this whistle-stop tour for how I got speaking on a stage in Norway in front of you guys, in front of the audience up there, who are on the second floor now, via social inadequacy, which is always a geek thing when you're young, resigning from jobs, earning significantly less money at times, being cajoled into talking at user groups, finding out to hang out with cool developers like you guys and just chat to them. I ended up being a Microsoft MVP, and I ended up talking at NDC and getting away with wearing loud suits like this at developer conferences. So how did I start? It's kind of being in the right time at the right place. And I hope to show that you have the ability to change your life. It's your choice where you end up working. Don't always make the most obvious choice or the right choice. And it's not about being the best developer ever. It's about being the best developer you can be and the best person you can be. And that's a much more interesting thing to try and achieve. And you'd be wise to ignore the conference thing, right? Talking at conferences is actually quite stressful at times. I didn't go to many sessions for the last few days because I've been making sure that this will work and trying to practice it. So instead of that, why don't you just be a really good developer in your workplace? Be awesome there. Contribute to some open source projects. Mentor other developers. Make their career paths really good. And be an authority on subjects you like. That's your road to find. But where did I start? I grew up in the countryside in the north of England. I happened to live next to friends who decided to build their own computer from a kit brought in from America. And they also had one of the first 100 Apple Macs ever brought into the UK. So I amazingly was used to the idea of mouses and pointers and windows way ahead of the time that a PC ever got that. And they sold me their second-hand ZX81. Which was a home computer in the UK, made by Sinclair. And when I went to high school, obviously, when you start high school, one of the things teachers might ask is, what do you think you want to be as a job? And there's people who want to be train drivers or doctors or lawyers. Maybe one of them wanted to be a teacher, but normally at school, when you're 11, no one wants to be a teacher because they look at the teacher and go, what a saddo. I don't want to be them. And I said I wanted to be a computer programmer. Not a developer, because developers didn't exist. They were computer programmers in those days. And pretty much the whole class went, what the hell is a computer programmer? So I was destined to be a computer programmer. So I ended up programming a ZX81 and a BBC Micro, which was the posh computer at the time. I found that I was limited by just doing BBC Basic. So I bought the advanced user guide for the BBC Micro. And on that cover, you can see things like assembly language, 6502 assembly. LDY stands for load the Y register. And I taught myself 6502 assembly language. I went off to sixth form college, where you do the exams before you go to university. And they told me, please don't do a computer science degree. If you're already doing assembly code, you don't want to do a computer science degree. You'll be so bored. So I took the easy route. I did physics, maths, and chemistry, which is a very geeky, sciencey thing to do. I avoided doing a fourth A-level, and I decided that maybe I might want to be a journalist in the future as well. So I decided to do typing exams. So I'm actually officially rated at 40 words per minute on an electric typewriter. I have a certificate to prove that. Touch typing is really handy later in life when you do become a developer. It's quite cool. And I did a media studies course as well. And that avoided me having to work too hard, let's be honest. But I had to choose where to go to university or college. And certainly my mother went, I think you should try and get into Oxford or Cambridge, which is what any parent or school would like you to do. I decided not to apply for physics at Cambridge because in my young life, I just looked at Cambridge and they said, if you do physics, you get a Bachelor of Arts degree, not a Bachelor of Science degree. All subjects were Bachelor of Arts. And I said, they don't count science as serious because they still consider it an art. I'm going to go somewhere that's going to give me a Bachelor of Science. I should have gone to Cambridge because that's where all the computing guys were. Well, they weren't in Oxford. But I did actually go to Oxford for a job interview. It was one of 4 universities I was applying to. They always interview you at Oxford separate, in person. You are meant to do an entrance exam. I was a cocky northerner who said, when they asked me why I hadn't done the entrance exam, I said, because I think you're like every other university and they don't make me do an exam. So clearly I didn't get into Oxford. But I already knew I wanted to go to this place called Brunel in London, Brunel University. And I wanted to go there because it had a radio station and it did something called work placements. So I was going to get to work in 3 companies while I was doing my degree. And I could see what the real world was like. So I went, no, to the dreaming spires of Oxford and that Gothic architecture and that wonderful buildings, to Brunel University, which Corbusier would have still had a problem with. This is the most brutalist concrete architecture going, and it still looked like, that's about 10 years before I went there, and it still looked like that then. But they had work placements, so it was good. So I've done the standard thing that everyone does in the kind of middle-class upbringing that I had in England. I went to school, I did my O-levels, I got A-levels, and I went to university. It was a really standard thing. I hit there as a stereotypical geek, poor social skills, scruffy, pale, programming till 2 in the morning on the computer instead of talking to people properly. And that's pretty much the background of quite a lot of developers. I feel there's far too many middle-aged, white, college-educated men in this room compared to what there should be. So it's important that we recognize that and change that. And allowing people to have different career paths and flexible career paths is actually part of that. So my first real choice, I decided that I wanted to work in television. It may surprise you, given the clothes I'm wearing at the moment, that I was quite keen on television. I used to watch a lot of it, even though there was only 3-4 channels when I was growing up. So one of the work placements I went to, the first one, was at a company, physics department, doing industrial research and development. And they made cans, and they're the guys who invented the fact that a drinks can goes in at the top slightly, instead of being straight. Which, by the way, saves 1/10 of a cent per can in aluminium, which when you're selling that much Coke matters quite a lot to your costs. So that's how they were successful in business. But while I was there, I saw this magazine, Computing, and it had a job for a real developer, an actual real job, at the BBC Computer Graphics Workshop, somewhere that did graphics for elections and the weather and the sports results. So I thought, I'll write to them and see if they've got any work placements, whether they'd consider me. I'll bypass the work placement officer at the university, who normally gets you your jobs. And I wrote to them, and they said, actually, we do work placements. We normally go to a different university. Kingston University is where we get our students from. We've got one for next year, but you can come in 2 years' time. So I went for possibly come in 2 years' time, went for a job interview. One of the things I had to do at that job interview is explain to the head of HR in the television department what a mouse was in terms of a computer. To someone who'd never seen one, that's actually quite hard to explain. There's a wire coming out, there's this metal ball bearing underneath, and it kind of has rollers in it, and it moves something on the screen, but you're not used to graphics, so you probably don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But I got the job, and it was helped by the fact that I'd done this media studies course at A-level instead of trying to do a fourth exam. And it was my chance to work in television, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. There's no chance I wasn't going to work in television, because it clearly was an exciting place to be, for me. It was definitely an exciting place to be. So how am I going to get there? I finished my university degree. I don't know if anyone's tried to get a job in television. It's kind of got a lot of people wanting to get jobs. Even then, it was quite hard to get into. So I was having to wait around. I decided that I hadn't had a proper holiday for 4 years. I realized to everyone in this room who works, they only get a couple of weeks at any one time on holiday. But as a student, you normally had long holidays over summer. We never got them because of work placements. So I decided to be unemployed for 6 months and just get money off the government and off my parents, clearly, because they were the ones subsidizing my lifestyle at that point. And I refused to get a job that wasn't in television. And I was quite determined about that. I went to quite a lot of job interviews, and there was even possibly a job interview at the police, the London Police Service. It's called the Metropolitan Police. But when you're in these interviews, I think they realized that if you were ever going to be given a job by the BBC, you would leave. So they didn't want to employ someone who was likely to leave, which is a fair point, because that's exactly what I would have done. So I eventually did get offered. I actually got offered a couple of weeks' work on a general election from a small company based inside Sky Television. And that was through someone who'd worked at the BBC Computer Graphics Workshop when I'd done my work placement. So because I'd chosen this weird university that had hideous architecture, I got a work placement. That allowed me to get a job in television. And then they thought, actually, he can code. He's quite good. We'll have him. We'll have him at £2,000 a year less than 2 years earlier when I was a student on a work placement. So it was a good job I had savings, because that was the only way I could survive living in London at that point. And we created the first in-house weather system for Sky News, doing the little suns and rains on a map and temperatures and having clouds come in and show you where the rain was going to be. And that was written in Visual Basic 1.0, which is a challenging thing to have done, running on Windows 3.1. And actually, that also led to becoming a network engineer at a breakfast TV channel as well. So I ended up being a weird dual life of being a programmer developer in the morning for 4 hours, getting on a train for 30 minutes to go to a different building where I was a network engineer. And I knew how to configure file servers and do networking, but I did virtually no programming. So eventually, I got enough of a permanent role at the TV company, at the breakfast TV company, that I could afford to just work afternoons. So I actually left this small company that was inside of Sky TV. One of the designers, graphic designers at Sky TV, had commented that my boss could only relate to things that had batteries in them, which explained his kind of demeanor and attitude. And I thought it was time for me to move on. The same designer, by the way, gave me one of the something in the UK we call a backhanded compliment. And what she said was I was the most normal computer person she'd ever met. That did not mean I was a normal person. I can quite realize what she was saying. But the really nice bit is I resigned, told my boss I was leaving, and he said, oh, where are you going to work? And I said, nowhere. I'm just going to get up at 12 every day, easily get up and just go and work for 4 hours in the afternoon. And he said, well, if you've not got a job, you could carry on working for us. And I think, you've missed why I'm leaving. Right? I'm leaving the job. And it was really an important moment because you only have one life. You'll be spending more time with people at work than you will with your friends or family at home. Like, genuinely, you spend more time with them. So if you are working in an environment you like, or you don't want to work with idiots, then don't. Leave and go somewhere else if you have the ability to do so. I know I'm in a privileged position where I was university educated, and I have skills, and I have that option. But if you have that option, seriously take it. Obviously, now I manage people, and I have developers who resign. It comes into my head that they may not want to work with idiots. And who is the idiot in my company? And I'm normally worried it's me. So I then became full-time. I went back to Sky and actually worked for them directly in the end, left my job as a network engineer, decided I was definitely going to be a programmer, actually a senior developer at that point, and then run the team inside of Sky doing computer graphics. But I got headhunted. This is in the days before LinkedIn. LinkedIn, they'd find you. They'd know what you were doing. They'd have a history. In these days, headhunters used to have to know people inside a company who knew people inside that company that they thought might want to leave and they could approach. So I got this phone call saying, do you want to work at this interactive TV company? So interactive TV was like applications on a set-top box, and it's really fancy, and it was the big thing at the time because people didn't have broadband, there was no data on phones, so the only way people kind of got to that kind of application or the internet was through their set-top box. So I thought, this sounds really good. Center of London, it was going to be energetic, it was a startup. It lasted 7 months before the company went bust. Right? So I left a secure job at Sky, where if I'd have waited another year, I would have had share options cashing out worth about £20,000. But I went to this tiny company in the middle of London. One of the reasons that apparently I got offered the job, I found out from the headhunter later, is when he interviewed people, he'd interview them on the phone, and if they were good on the phone, he'd then bring them in person and have a chat with them. And he had to have a way of categorizing people. And what he did was categorize people as domestic, short haul, or long haul. So his comment was, if I was sitting next to this person on a plane and I was talking to them for the journey, would you only want to fly a domestic flight from Oslo to Stavanger? Or a short-haul flight, maybe to Madrid or somewhere like that? Or would you want to go long-haul to New York, having to talk to that person for 9 hours? The amazing bit was I was categorized as long-haul, which, if people have met me at Geek Beers or the party, may or may not be the feeling you got. So your mileage may vary, and it may be much shorter than long-haul. And you may think, that wasn't very lucky. That wasn't a good choice. I went to this company, 7 months, gone bust. But it was really good because I started working in the center of London instead of being on the outskirts. Sky was 10 minutes walk from my home, but it's just where people live. It's not where anything happens. I got given a crazy job title of broadcast architect, which doesn't really exist because they just made a title up to fit what I was going to do. I learned more about startups and VC funding and things like that. And that whole process of having a job title made for me, being employed by a company who said, we're not sure what exactly you're going to do, but we need people like you in our organization, which gave you a huge amount of validation. That was ego stroking big time, to be headhunted and told, we're making a job for you because we think you are worth employing. But it went bust. So what did I do? I thought, I know. I chatted to a colleague who worked at the breakfast TV company. He did IT services. He hadn't got any software, the ability to write his own software, so we'd form a separate software arm, and I would work for myself. Have anyone here said you work for yourself? Do you really work for yourself, or do you work for your clients? And the answer is you work for your clients or customers, right? So you don't really work for yourself. The interesting thing is you get to pick who you work for. So you get to pick the clients and customers, and you can avoid the idiots. So It is quite nice. I took a 50% pay cut in order to start that company. But, you know, I'm a founder of a tech company. It's just after the dot-com boom. So what job title do I give myself? Chief Technology Officer. Because clearly I can just have any title I want because I own the company. A CTO should really understand business as well as the technology. I clearly didn't, but that didn't matter. Always remember that when you deal with a CTO from a company. If it's a really small company and they're a founder, they may not have all the CTO credentials you might expect. They'll be very enthusiastic, though, and probably quite interesting. Importantly, I was still in the center of London. And I could go to this newly started user group, the London.NET user group, which was advertised in something called the Msdn flash email, an email you got once a month to tell you what was happening in the world of Microsoft. Because you didn't go to websites, you waited for the email to turn up to read about what was happening. And it said, hey, there's a user group, and it's just 2 streets away. And this is where I met someone called Ian Cooper. Now, this is a photo from a developer conference. You can tell it's a developer conference because there are 5 white, college-educated, middle-aged men. Right? There is a developer of concern in this photo. It's this man. That is Ian Cooper. It's that man. Now, if you don't recognize Ian Cooper, and you may have heard of him because he does talk a lot at NDC and do workshops, he doesn't look like that anymore. He looks more like this. So he left the world of finance and banking and said, I'm never going back, and to prove it, I'm going to change how I look and how I act, and my whole, you know, really cool. The irony being that by now, the world has moved on enough, he could go back into banking. Because that doesn't stop you being a banker anymore, which is quite funny. So, but it got me into, Ian Cooper said, you could do a talk at the user group, just a little one on mobile development, because you seem quite keen on mobile development. So I did a couple of talks, only 10 minutes. Eventually he said, you know, we're doing this conference, Developer Day, the first one that had launched. And he said, I think you should do this talk. So I did it on an ORM I was writing because, as every developer knows, what you need is a new framework because you're not going to use someone else's. And virtually every developer thinks they could write an ORM, so did I. I'm not sure I really did. I did try and make it open source, but never gave it a push. But I got picked. It was cool. You can see me at this conference, just there, with my user group T-shirt. Oddly enough, while Ian was looking smart in those days, I looked like that. I had much more hair and several more chins. So I think what happened was I got my hair cut short, Ian grew his beard, and we kept the average follicle length in the developer community in London at the same average, right? And maintained it. But the interesting thing is, I thought, I've gone and spoken at a conference. I can't believe it. This is it. I got selected. I've got my validation. And then one of the organizers published the statistics on how many talks had been proposed, how many rooms there were, and the way you got to talk at DDD1 was to submit a talk because that's how many talks they had for the number of rooms. So it had nothing to do with how good I was, right? That's the realization. However, by talking at those conferences, and I improved and I got better at speaking, and it gave me more confidence, and it helped me when I'm running my own company because it's sales skills. That's what presenting is, so it allows me to do sales better to companies. And I ended up hanging around with something called an MVP from Microsoft because some of these guys are Microsoft MVPs. And oddly enough, I kept talking at user groups, and eventually they nominated me to be an MVP. And then eventually someone asked me to talk at a paid conference in London, NDC London. And I ended up standing here on the stage, giving a keynote to you guys in the middle of a pandemic. And if you don't enjoy this keynote, you need to talk to Ian Cooper and tell him he should never have got me to speak at London.NET user group. So it's his fault. But we closed down the company I co-owned. We got money at the end of the day. And I did that partly because I was about to have, apart from there was a recession in the TV industry, or recession in the country, which means less advertising. As soon as there's less advertising, TV companies get less money, so they pay less to production companies to make TV programs. That's it, we get less money. So we closed that company down, and I was having children, or just about to have my first daughter, and thought it would be good to be my own boss properly and have time at home, because my partner was still a video editor at GMTV, and she worked long shifts. She worked 4 night shifts, 12 hours one week, 3 day shifts the next week, 12 hours each there. She worked Saturdays and Sundays and things like that. So someone was going to have to look after the kid. At certain points, it would be just me. It wouldn't be like being there at the same time. Also, so you go, I'm going to work for myself. I've got a little bit of money from the company. And then you realize, however small a child are, and they're tiny, right? Children, when they come out, they're like this big, right? They need a room that big to store all the crap you need, right? It's like a huge amount of stuff that you need to buy to support a kid. So I suddenly realized that, yes, I do need work. I'd got a contact at the user group who said, do you want to work for me? I'm just a couple of days a week. So within 1 week of having my child, having started my own company to decide I can work for myself, within 1 week I was already working between Christmas and New Year for someone in order to make sure I had the money to start that company properly and get it going. And the other thing I needed to do was buy an Msdn license, which costs a huge amount of money. It was the most expensive thing you could have to buy for their company at the time. There was no free one like BizSpark in those days, so it was going to be £2,000, which was a huge amount of money. But I found a loophole. I found that if you became a Microsoft partner, you might get a free Msdn license. But you had to be a silver tier. But that meant you had to have 200 points. It's a Microsoft marketing thing. And one of the ways you could have 200 points is to have this logo on your software. This was a point at which .NET was so big in Microsoft's head, everything had .NET on it. Even Windows Server at one point was about to be called Windows.NET Server. And so I needed to load software onto Microsoft's site to prove I could write a SOAP web service, because the future was going to be SOAP, XML, WSDLs, that's where everything lay. I could put this logo on my website, that earned me 200 partner points, that got me a free Msdn license. In between my daughter being born at about 10:15 in the morning on the 20th of December, and me going home, I went home and I collected all the stuff to pick up my partner and daughter and bring them home for the first time and tidy the house up. I also spent 1.5 hours using Verisign to code sign some code, upload it to Microsoft, and apply for my logo. That's what I did in between my daughter being born and her coming home for the first time. Frightening. So I went along with that, and I worked for myself, and I eventually had another child. And I went, I can't work at home with children because they come home from nursery and they want to be with you, and you're a bit snappy because you're halfway through coding. And I thought, I want a separation of work and home. So I started renting an office up the road from some financial advisors near Kew Botanic Gardens. It's a very nice place to work, these offices. And the really nice bit about working there was also everyone was self-employed. There was about 12 people in that office. There was museum designers, market researchers, charity workers, the 2 financial advisors. And if it was nice weather and sunny and pleasant to be outside, you'd go down the pub. Because we all worked for ourselves, so clearly we could do whatever we liked. Eventually, my other half worked out this was what was happening and said, I want to stop being a video editor, working nights. It's killing me, because it's really hard work. I mean, it takes days for you to recover from working nights and get back into being daytime, and then by the time you've recovered, you're back working long shifts on the day. And she wanted to see the kids. So I went, right, I've got to stop mucking about. There was another lack of customers at that point in my life, so I tried to go back to Sky TV. And it was interesting because they had a general election coming up. And they said, we need extra resources. You've worked on general elections. It's changed a bit since you were here. It's been about 6, 7 years, but you know your stuff. You can help us write it. Obviously, I had all this childcare, so I told them that I'm only available for a certain amount because I've got to pick up the kids from nursery and I look after them at the weekends. And so I went off onto this trip to work at Sky again. This is my commute into work, by the way, through Richmond Park. And I'm happily going up the road, which is a metaphor for working at Sky, you see. And this deer runs across the road, which is, we've got a rehearsal, and it's going to be this Saturday. And this was on the Thursday. And I said, but I can't do that Saturday, because I'm looking after my kids. Like, the other half works. And they went, can't you get her to call in sick? No, because that's wrong. Right? You know, I said I couldn't work here on that day. And it got to the point where this junior manager said to me, I'm going to terminate your contract. He basically said, it's either the job or the kids. Right? That's what he did to me. And this is a warning to anyone who manages people who gets into that point where they say, the job is more important than your children. I mean, just look at this. More important than that, some crappy election at Sky TV? It wasn't. So I just left it. And that was one of the best choices I made. Personally, it was really nice to know that push comes to shove, I would tell someone to stick their job over and above my children if it was going to affect my children. But more importantly, I ended up in a better job. I was at another user group, alt.net Beers, after a conference in London, chatted to someone. They were at a music startup, MP3 downloads. I'd been a records manager at the student radio station at Brunel. I really liked music. I'm into bands. I listen to new music all the time still. I kind of pick up new bands all the time. And so I went to this interview. And it was a proper startup. The CTO had broken his leg skiing the week before and had a plaster cast on the table in front of me because it was quite painful. The head developer or senior developer at the company, a New Zealand guy, said he'd seen me give my DDD talk 2 months ago. And it was really good. And I thought, I just have to not blow this interview because I really want this job. And within a few months, the head of development went back to New Zealand anyway. And I became the head of development for this MP3 startup. And then eventually, I actually became permanent. When I became permanent, I negotiated into my contract that I was always going to leave at 2 on a Wednesday afternoon to pick up the kids, take them swimming, go to Scouts, go to Cubs, and do all that kind of thing. I also negotiated that I would have 10 days per year to talk at user groups, conferences, or go to the MVP Summit. This is amazing. The amazing bit is that when you join a company, that's when you can negotiate those kind of things into your contract. It's really hard later to do that, but it's really important to think about that when you join a company. And they were really good about it all. And I got the proper startup buzz again. And I was working with a fantastic development team, both at the back end, they were fully agile, and there was a PHP team using a system called Magento. If anyone's ever used that, it's an e-commerce platform. They managed, because it was music, and we had the whole of Warner, EMI, and Sony. Can you believe it? I'm in a job where we have the entire of Warner Music, EMI, and Sony on hard drives in our office. CD quality level. Unbelievable. But that's millions of items that we have to put in a shop. They made Magento work so well that Magento tried to poach my staff to work on the product to get it to that scale, which is an amazing place to work. But eventually, the CTO left. We interviewed for new CTOs. I said, my input was, whatever we do, we don't interview this one. We don't employ this guy. They employed that guy. That guy said, you know, all this TDD, this tests, it really slows your development down, doesn't it? And do you really need a build server? Can't you just release it straight from Visual Studio? No. So we had a difference of opinion on how you're meant to run a company and how you're meant to develop software. So I started looking elsewhere because that's what you do when you decide you don't want to work with that idiot. It's a different kind of idiot, but he was annoying because he was going to cause me to make compromises in producing good quality software, and I didn't like that. So I started looking elsewhere. Guess what? I was still going to the London.net user group, chatting to Ian Cooper. By now, this guy called Dylan Beattie, who wore this hat, was coming to the user group, and there was a guy called Toby Henderson, who I'd been at conferences with and shared bedrooms in order to save money, clearly. because we wanted to make our conferences as cheap as possible. And he was working at Huddle. He just hired Toby about 6 months earlier, and I went, Huddle sounds interesting. It's a proper startup in the center of town. It's at something called Silicon Roundabout. So this is the sunny uplands of the startup world. This is where it's all happening. This is fields of golden wheat. So I'm going, I think I need to go. How do I get to talk to Ian Cooper? In a more private space than just after a user group. And I spotted on Twitter that they were going to this restaurant called Hawksmoor. And I don't know how many of you have been to London and visited a Hawksmoor, but it's quite a nice restaurant. I had no idea what it was. I knew it was something to do with steaks. Thought, yeah, we're going to have a steak and chips, have a chat, something like that. When I got there, they said, yes, come, because someone dropped out. I looked at this board on the wall, and what they actually have is huge hunks of meat in kilograms that you buy, right? And they roast in an oven. They're fantastic, by the way. But we'd come late, so the smaller weights had disappeared, and it was only the expensive, bigger weights. And I looked at Dylan and Toby and Ian, and they're going, I think we should have this wine and this wine. And they were picking wines off it. I looked around this table and thought, you know what? Those 3 people are single and don't have children. Like, they're used to spending £90 on a meal. This is going to be a phenomenally expensive thing to explain to my other half when I get home. I better get a job out of this. And the fortunate bit was, I got a job out of this. So that was a good explanation to the other half the next day, who'd always been quite good at allowing me to go to conferences and user groups because she realized how that actually helped my career. And she should be at home at the moment watching this on YouTube. Right? And one of the nice things was, although I got the job via Ian, who never got a referral bonus because he was going to directly manage me and he wouldn't be allowed to get a bonus for recruiting someone. But the joy of working for Huddle at that point was you got to meet this woman, a recruiter. I don't have huge sympathy for recruiters in most of the time, but this person is fantastic, Michelle Flynn. She helped onboard me into Huddle. She helped negotiate the 4.5 days that I had at the previous company, and she said, what you don't want to do is work extra hours. You want to take that as time off. You want to work on a 90% salary, because then people can't phone you on that half day and expect you to do work. They can't expect, when they ask you to work late on other days, it's not like you're already working late to make up that Wednesday, so it's fine. And she was quite right. It was one of the best pieces of advice. Did mean I took a pay cut, by the way, to go to Huddle. Yet again, 3rd pay cut in my career. But she has always cared about developers. She's helped run user groups. She actually talked to developers for years before ever employing them and waited till she noticed they were ready to leave. And that's an amazing ability to have. She now has changed her life career to be a life coach and only does a tiny amount of recruitment. But she's incredibly talented. And one of the reasons I had such a good time at Huddle was being brought on by her. So, what are going to be the things that I would advise you? Or what did I learn that may be useful to you? Not all of this will be useful to you. We all go through different paths. We all go on a different journey. So only some of this might be applicable. But I think one of the things I learned was that I work for people and projects, not companies. So I definitely want to work somewhere where I enjoy being with the people, that I believe in the product that I'm working on. And I don't have, one of the guys at Sky, when I went back, said, you should be proud to even have a Sky work pass on your, hanging around your neck. And I didn't understand that because that wasn't me. I'm proud to work in that department. I'm proud to do the graphics. I'm proud to help other developers do their best work. So when I'm working for an MP3 download company, it's fantastic because I'm a music guy. I really like getting into music. When I worked in TV, it was great because I watched so much TV. I still watch far too much TV. I have set-top boxes full with the hard drives are bursting. I can't deal with a streaming service because I could stream for 6 months off my own hard drives as it is. of legitimately recorded stuff, not even stuff that I've got off BitTorrent. And I've never always gone for the most money. And this may be, is this something I learned? No, because even at the age of 17, I saw my brother come back from university. And my brother was always smartly dressed. He dyed his hair. He was really cool. You know, he tried to be up with the latest trends and things like that. I, not so much. Really not so much. And I watched him get up at 5 in the morning to go and work on farms and pick lettuces, where a tractor would go through the field and he would be lying flat that far from the ground picking lettuces in order to earn money. And my conclusion from that is you should never want money enough to have to work for it, right? Because I don't want to do that. So instead, I'll buy less clothes, not have my hair cut as often, all sorts of things that I would do to avoid having to pick lettuces at 6 in the morning in a field in Lancashire. And Dickens wrote some famous words, Charles Dickens, in David Copperfield. And this, you may have heard this before, but annual income, £20, annual expenditure, £19, 19 shillings and sixpence, which, to go into the modern world, means you have 6p left over at the end of the year. Result is happiness. If your annual income is £20 and your annual expenditure is £20, nothing and sixpence, then the result is misery because you're now having to owe money to people. So I'm a strong believer that happiness today still doesn't mean you have to earn the most money. It's nice to be comfortable. It's nice to be able to buy stuff that you like and have a nice house, but you don't need to have the biggest house, the fastest car, any of that. It really isn't going to make you much happier. And I'm hoping that post-pandemic people realize that more than ever, but there is that danger we're just going to flip back and go back, which I hope we don't. And the other thing I learned was to build a savings buffer. So if you ever work as a contractor or a consultant, even an employee, if you can save 3 to 6 months' salary so that if you had to leave a job, the next job is one you pick rather than one you have to go to, you will be much happier. Because I got forced into a position where I went back to Sky, where I needed the money, and it was not a happy experience. And when it's right to concentrate on the family, do it, right? You only get one chance to see your kids grow up. Like, seriously, that's why my partner wanted to give up her job so she could watch her kids grow up properly. It's because she was missing out on that. So it's got a lot better. We actually, in the UK, have paternity leave. We had no paternity leave when I had kids, and my boss was an absolute sod and gave me no paternity leave. It was me. I didn't give myself paternity leave at that point. I was working within days. The kids, because I didn't earn the most money, I had to share a room for 14 years. They probably moan about that quite a bit at the moment, still, even though they've got rooms to their own now. But that will go. They'll forget about that. But the fact that I was there, going on holidays, camping, all the stuff that I did do because I was actually there will be much more important. Although, apparently, they forgot all the times that I stood at the side of a netball or hockey pitch in the freezing snow over winter watching them get injured. Apparently, they can't even remember being injured, less the fact that my feet were freezing. But that didn't really affect them. And go to user groups and community events. Right? If you stay just in your own company, or you don't really go into forums or join like an open source project, you're meeting the same people all the time, and you're all working with the same tools, and maybe occasionally someone brings new stuff in. But if you go to user groups, you'll meet people from 20, 30 companies, and they're all doing different things, and they've got different ideas and different ways of working. Some of those will be really cool. Some of those you might bring back to your company, and that'll be really good, because you can change your company to be where you want to work instead of having to leave your company and go somewhere else. That's even better if you can manage that, because you're going to improve it for everyone, including your fellow workers. I know that contradicts family life. My comment about family life, going to user groups, because you tend to do it out of hours, out of work hours. But it's really valuable and really worthwhile, I think. And that London.net user group got me my first contract work. And it got me speaking at user groups and the conferences and everything, and ending up here. Don't probably do all that, you know. So, and the other thing, apart from you should always be nice to everyone, wherever you work, when you do work somewhere, there are 3 people you should be especially nice to. The first one is the security guard. This is the guy who lets you in the building and sorts out how you park your bike under the building, for me, in the bike store. And keep them friendly, because they're really nice people, if you get to know them. The next one to get you be friendly to is the receptionist, because they're the person who gets your Amazon parcels and makes sure they end up on your desk. Plus, they probably give you the spare key when you forget your door pass, and that's the pass you need to be able to get to the toilet without borrowing the pass off your colleagues. And finally, whoever in accounts accepts your invoices or does the payroll, because that makes sure you make their life easy and you get paid on time. But otherwise, I hope you can equally have an interesting career and go down these interesting roads. That looks like it's sunset, but that was the middle of the day in December last year on a 100K ride. And I hope your journey through life will be as interesting and as pleasurable. And I hope this may just have given you 1 or 2 things that you haven't thought about before that actually mean you have a really enjoyable and successful development career. Thank you very much.